Hello, welcome to Law Unfiltered. I'm Jonathan Mason,
And I'm Sonya Madison.
and how are you, Sonya?
I'm good. It's a nice day today.
Yeah, it is. We've taken a week or two off, so it's good to be back, and a lot has happened in the time.
I know it's like we took off and the world just went to a war zone between police shootings and race issues. It's been crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, we're at a interesting time, in our history, and it coincides with the political season. So, just overall, like, what's your take on, where we are with the shootings and the responses and the movements?
Well, I think we haven't shifted too far from where we were to begin with. I mean, the shootings in general, we've had mass shootings that happened, and we talked about before where you would hope that gun control topics or issues or legislation would have happened, and it hasn't. And so in this situation, we've had, of course, Trayvon Martin, we've had Eric Garner, we've had other instances where people have brought to light some of the racial issues that comes when it comes to police protection in the community. And so I don't think much has changed. I just think we are just continuously saying, hey, this remains an issue. We have tried to put more spotlight on it. We've tried to put more video cameras out because and even in this case, in some of these cases, there was a camera on the police officers on their body. And so that still didn't necessarily deter them, assuming it was about race. And of course, you're going to have a lot of people say, well, it had nothing to do with race as to why someone felt fear as a police officer. But I think it should draw into the equation, well, let's define what is a reasonable fear. Let's define excessive force a little bit more so that we can then come to a common ground on what should and should not happen when it comes to trying to detain someone.
Yeah. See, I think that, for one thing, I've been out myself in some of the protests, and there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of emotion, in some cases I would say hate, that you see being expressed. And I feel like it's a situation over the last couple of shootings have been like, it's a situation where, you keep like poking someone, and you just poke them, and you just keep poking them, and eventually you poke them one or two. Eventually, they're just going to get to the point where they're going to retaliate back, and even if it's not the actual person, just in general, because the shooters, like the police shooters in Baton Rouge and in Dallas, they weren't necessarily personally affected. Their family or someone was killed by the police, but it's sort of been it's had this effect on people where it's, I don't know if radicalized is the right word to use or not, but it certainly stirred, and hopefully not more people are going to take similar action, but so, and maybe it was just that they were the last two shootings were back to back, or for me, the video and seeing a young man just basically sit there and die on camera, and nobody was even trying to help him, comfort him or nothing, while he was sitting there bleeding to death. I think there becomes a tipping point. And I'm not saying a tipping point to retaliate against the police, but a tipping point where something has to be done. And in my mind, it's not really fully about the guns, it's not really fully about the crime. It's about like community engagement. It's about hope and opportunity for people who live in, say high crime areas, regardless of what race it is in that area, where I don't know if people in general need to be shown that there's a better way, there's a different way, given alternatives. I don't have a solution, and one of my frustrations is people are, as soon as something happens, people are talking about it on TV. We have athletes, and I'm glad that they're speaking out, but just talk in and of itself will get us nowhere. So
Well, one thing I did like, one of the big leaders in the Black Lives Matter movement met with a couple of chief police
Right.
officers and President Obama, and there was an exchange of what each side felt like the
And
solution
that's
should be.
exactly what I think we need more of.
But one of the things I did like about that was, I mean, at least according to the leader of the Black Lives Matter movement, he was saying, we were talking about this whole idea of you're in fear based on my race. And I know what you're saying is a lot of it is just dealing with socioeconomic. If you're in a certain neighborhood, that perhaps it's not based on race, it's just the fear of I've dealt in this neighborhood and I'm trying to anticipate the worst. But I still think when you're going before a judge to determine whether or not it was justified in what you did, to have to bring up a past of, well, every time I pull over someone, I should feel justified in being fearful and be able to pull out a gun. And probably the one you're talking about in particular with the Castillo, where the guy said, hey, I have a gun, I have a permit, and as he goes to reach it to show him, the police officer shoots him in front of his child as well as in front of his girlfriend. I think there needs to be a line to say, well, listen, were you in imminent fear of your life at that point? If he has pretty much, for lack of a better word, incriminated himself, even though he didn't do anything wrong, but told you, I'm about to reach for a gun, this isn't a shock. I'm going for no other reason. And there have been recently in Los Angeles, there was a police officer who the city's going to settle because it was clear that, listen, you weren't in imminent fear of your life. You shot him. And he's saying, well, it's because I told him to put his hands up. After 15 seconds, he didn't do so, so I felt in fear. But we need to define what is a justifiable fear.
I agree. I agree with that. And you're right. I believe some of that is based on race. We didn't really mention, and it hasn't really gotten a lot of publicity, that here in Atlanta, we had a white police officer who was just charged with murder and killing a young African-American male. And it's kind of been pretty quiet.
Surprisingly.
Yeah, it has been.
But people do want to focus on what isn't, happening versus let's celebrate some of the things that are happening. Let's see what were those fact patterns so that it's known across the board, listen, this should be a standard. Right.
And I did read some facts about that case. But getting back to the protests for a second, I think one thing that's happened with these shooters is that it almost makes it seem like, and they probably wouldn't agree, but it's almost like we need to take a different stance now, because I feel like the street protests in and of themselves have gotten too dangerous now, even for the protesters, because if you've got these people out here who, and the other thing that's happened, there are two things. One, I think it's physically, gotten too, very risky to be out there for your life, your health, your safety. But because of the response with people shooting police, then it gives a segment of the population the opportunity to blame everything on the Black Lives Matter movement, when Black Lives Matter is not in favor of shooting police, obviously, and they've come out and said that, but we have a convention going on right now, but let them tell it. And the Black Lives Matter is, that's why police are getting shot.
Which is so weird, because police officers don't want us to think every police officer is out to kill every black man, but yet they want to put this, stigma on a movement, when again, that movement isn't about being violent.
It's true. And now, I saw the other day that a police union was talking about scaling back open carry laws. It's like now they feel at risk, and maybe now that can prompt some dialogue, some changes, or some of the things that we've talked about, some of the things that other people have talked about that need to happen. More meetings like the type that you mentioned with public officials, and I definitely think meetings between police chiefs and lead community activists are definitely more of what's needed.
Particularly if they go back to their departments or their communities and let them know, okay, here's what the other side is saying. Because I think it is important for people to understand the other perspective. Just like when it comes to race issues, it's important for people to understand the perspective from a minority as well as to understand from perspective from the majority. And one thing that you touched on and I thought was extremely important is, while, I mean, again, I don't condone violence in any way, I think it is the combination of the nonviolent and the violent movement that is sparking people to, hopefully say, okay, let's get around this table. It's almost like the minute you leave the house, you're in a war zone. You gotta prepare yourself as either a black person or as a police officer to be in fear. And when you think back to the 60s and the 50s, I mean, the same was going on. You did have two types of movements. You had the violence versus the nonviolent. And while everyone does put a lot of high praise on the nonviolent movement, it was, to me, the combination of both that led this country to say, okay, listen, this is enough. People are really, really dying. I mean, their liberty and their freedom is really at risk here. It's time to do something.
Yeah. One of the saddest things was, to me, one of the officers that was killed in Baton Rouge, his Facebook post just a couple of days before he died, where he expressed the sentiment that a lot of police officers probably feel, and for that to happen to him, a couple of days later, it's just horrible. But I generally believe that the overwhelming majority of police officers are good, upstanding, ethics. Yeah. But I also feel like police departments haven't done enough to get rid of or to investigate or fire or whatever they have to do, prosecute the ones that are, and not just killing people, all kinds of unethical police.
Excessive force in general.
Excessive force in general.
Or not. Yeah.
Right. And so, I don't know the solution to that. I don't know if police departments are, struggling to man a force, or because no one wants to do it, or because the budgets aren't there to hire more. Because I read in one police department was talking about maybe they are going to have all their officers in teams. Well, silly me, I thought all police officers were already in teams.
Yeah.
That's just the way I've always known it. But maybe we can't afford to do that anymore.
You definitely do see more times two cops pulling you over now instead of just one. And I think that has definitely increased. One of the things you also touched upon is, and this is something that's come up in the past, our trainings, whether we as police officers are truly recognizing our prejudices. No one wants to admit that they have some type of feeling or some type of prejudgment against another person. And so if you're not honest with yourself, then you can't change it, you can't address it. And I think that's one of the things that some police officers or some police departments have looked into, but a lot of them haven't. And if you can't get to that point, then by the time you get in front of a situation where you're calling upon those prejudices to make a judgment call, it becomes too late.
Right. Yeah. So where do you see this all heading?
Unfortunately, given that this is an election year, I do think, one, the Republican Party, particularly listening to their convention that was going on yesterday, and they're pretty much saying, well, there's a white America and there's a black America, and we need to get back to one America. Well, that to me means that you didn't recognize that these were issues. You're saying we're just bringing up something that was never there to begin with. And so with that, and then the Hillary camp, while she recognizes it's an issue, I don't think she has come up with, or at least articulated a way to solve it. I think she's more concerned with trying to get, some of the votes across the board in terms of some people who are still on the fence because they don't want to vote for Trump. And so in that way, I really don't think we'll get any change per se, but I do think that it will continuously remain an issue. I do think the Black Lives Matter movement will continue to try to expose as much as they can the problem, but this Congress, I just don't see anything progressing from there. Hopefully states will do something, because to be honest, I think that's where it should lie anyways, because a lot of crimes are state crimes. But we'll just have to see.
Yeah, we will, and it's just interesting that it coincides with the presidential election, and unfortunately, I can see why Republicans would want, make this a political issue. It's just, I don't know the numbers. I haven't studied the numbers. All I know is the times that we live in now, and it just seems like, every week there's some sort of a mass shooting of some type, and not, and also police incidents as well. So I know they're kind of like two different things, but now they're kind of like being linked. The
Right.
police shootings are now prompting, mass shootings, although the last couple have been mass shootings of police officers. And
But
before
the
that,
Republicans, they're making it an issue, but they're not making it the correct issue. I mean, I think they're focused so much on protecting police officers that they're painting the Black Lives Matter movement as, again, a hindrance or something detrimental to the community.
right, and I think they just want to just say, well, it's President Obama's fault that
Right.
all these shootings are, taking place. But that's
But
not
you're
really
missing the issue.
right, and it's not really examining the cause of these shootings and what exactly any president could do about it, especially a president that doesn't have control of either House of Congress.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a tough situation, but I applaud that athletes, who are standing up and because I mean they have a lot of influence.
They do.
And
hopefully they'll go back to those communities, go back to those kids, and really try to educate them. I mean, I know obviously there's an issue of prejudices among, people of different races, but I still think education is definitely in the forefront. Let's try to improve these communities. Let's try to build up your own so that, when it becomes an issue, it's not because someone has a rap sheet. It is truly this person was on a straight and narrow, and because of his race or because of any other reason aside from his actions, he was targeted.
yeah, I agree. All right. Well, no, that's a tough issue. So, but it's one that needed to be
Definitely
dealt with.
And I'm sure we'll talk about it again.
I'm sure, and hopefully by the next time we meet, there won't be any other major incidents like that.
We'll be talking about legislation and not
Hopefully.
just more shootings.
All right.
Well, thanks for tuning in.
All right. We'll see you next time.